That was a little-known group from the 1950s, Eddie Egret and his Waterfowl Band. It's off their live album, Birds of a Feather Jam Together. Can't really find it on Spotify anymore. All joking aside, thank you for being here tonight. I suspect most of you, if not all of you, know me, but in case not, I'm Tim Roy, and I'm a doctoral student here at the Shepherd School, and for the past 3 years, I've also had the privilege of serving as the teaching assistant for the Rice Electroacoustic Music Labs, or RIM Labs as we call them. I want to start out by thanking RIM Labs for guidance, equipment lending, and technical support. And more specifically, I want to thank the two individuals who are RIM Labs. Firstly, Dr. Kurt Stallman, Associate Professor of Composition and Director of RIM Labs. And also in the back, Dr. Chapman Welch, who is our electroacoustic specialist, lecturer here at Rice, and also a wonderful composer. So I just want to thank you both for everything you've done for me for the past several years, and for your guidance and friendship while I've been here. I also want to thank my performer tonight, Maxwell Winningham. Max stepped in on Monday to take over for another performer who fell ill, and he's been working really hard since then, so Max, thank you so much for taking over. This presentation concerns a project that I've been working on since the spring, although I've been thinking about it for a long time. It's been something that I've really wanted to do for a very long time, and I see it as the beginning of an artistic journey that I've been headed toward for quite some time. I call the project Swamp Songs Marsh Music, and it's an expansion of my practice as a field recordist and composer, as well as my own aesthetic theories pertaining to recorded sound and their use in composed music. So I'm calling this presentation Swamp Songs Marsh Music, Recording the Gulf Coast and My Process of Ecological Composition. It could have been titled many other things, but this is the first halfway decent idea that I came up with, so this is what I stuck with. I also have made a website that documents the project. It is at the bottom of the screen there, swampsongblog.wordpress.com, and although I don't think it's linked from my personal website yet, I will do that immediately. Before I explain the project and give a rundown of the contents of this presentation, I just want to share a bit about my background. I grew up in Nederland, Texas, which is a small city on the Gulf Coast between Beaumont and Port Arthur. It's about 90 miles from there to Houston. So you can kind of see it off to the right side of the map there. And from there, it's not too far. It's just a stone's throw to the Louisiana border and Lake Charles. You can see from this closer map that there are a lot of waterways in the area. We have the Neches River, which is right here. Whoops. Wow, that's wild. Okay. That's a lot harder to do than I thought it was. And the Neches River pours into Sabine Lake, which itself then empties into the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of people do a lot of fishing and outdoors type things there. And I was no different. Growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors with my dad. Our family has belonged to a private fishing and hunting lease for several generations called the Neches River Sportsman's Club. And this is a picture from about 10 years ago. Before you start picturing yachts, thinking about the Neches River Sportsman's Club, it's not that fancy. We pretty much just stuck to this 14-foot aluminum boat here. So, countless hours of my childhood, my formative years, my young adulthood were spent out at this place that we simply called the Lease. And aside from all the wonderful fishing and hunting experiences I had, I was always really enthralled by the total sensory experience that the place offered. There's the feel of the breeze as it comes over the levee, and the sound as it ripples through the salt grass, and the smell of the marsh, and the taste of salt in the air, and the hum of dragonflies, and the laughter and cooing of marsh hens. And all these sensations, particularly the sounds which emanate from all directions when you're out there, it can be very overwhelming. And recently I've come to understand that the sounds of wetland ecosystems are as much a part of me as any music that I ever grew up listening to. Those sounds are really ingrained in me, and they conjure in me very specific feelings and associations. Composers always talk about the journey, the struggle to develop a sound world that is entirely unique. That's always sort of the goal that composers talk about. And not only a unique sound world, but one that is of deep personal meaning. This pursuit of mine is an earnest attempt to harness peculiarities of a natural sound world, which is so important to me, and then integrate them into my own compositional language. This project also marks my entry into the world of Ambisonics, which is a method of recording and reproducing full sphere sound images across an array of loudspeakers, usually in a surround arrangement like we have tonight. We have a ring of 8 loudspeakers. All of the recordings that you're going to hear tonight were made using a special microphone owned by Rim Labs. It's made by the company Soundfield. It's a Soundfield SPS 200. This is a close-up of that mic. It's known as a tetrahedral mic because it has 4 capsules. You can see that in the picture. And so it's used to record full 360-degree sonic images. And I'll talk more about this later. A few more pieces of gear that I used. This modular windshield by Rycote. Basically, the microphone sits inside of this cage-looking device. That's called a pistol grip that I'm holding. If you're going to record outdoors, you absolutely have to have this, or you're just going to get nothing but wind noise. And you still are probably going to get some wind noise if it's super windy. And then there's this fuzzy, heavy-duty windscreen that you can put over that that people call a dead cat. And this is just a funny picture that we took of my wife showing the dead cat to our dog, and she was kind of a little dismayed by it. And then I used this portable recording device, a sound device is Mix Pre 6. It has 4 really pristine preamplifiers, which are perfect for recording the 4 mic capsules from the Soundfield mic. So here's just one more photo of me with all the equipment. I've got the mic in one hand. I have headphones on, monitoring the signal feed from the sound devices that the mic is feeding to. And I was about to actually go outside and record this really loud bird that had been fascinating me for weeks on end because it was just so incredibly loud. It was outside of our apartment, and I never saw it. I'm still not sure exactly what kind of bird it is, but this is what it sounded like. I have audio here. actually posted that to a website that is for birders, like aficionados of bird watching and bird recordists, field recordists. And I had several people say that it was a red-shouldered hawk, but I listened to a few recordings of that, and it didn't quite match up, so I'm still not sure what kind of bird that is. But it's provided a lot of musical inspiration for me, which I'll come back to. So here's a rundown of the rest of what I'll talk about today. I'll give a little summary of my field recording excursions with some raw audio samples. There will be an explanation of ambisonic recording technology, a little bit of theory with some demonstrations, and then I want to talk about what my process has been for using wildlife field recordings, composing, and examples from a work in progress, and that's where Max will come in. So here's a non-exclusive list of locations where I conducted field recording. I did go to other places, but these are the locations where I saw or heard rather the best results. Some of the recordings that you heard when you came in were from Cattail Marsh in Beaumont, Texas. That was the really active soundscape with a lot of birds and a lot of different things going on. And also Brazos Bend State Park, which is about an hour south of here, and I got a really good recording of bullfrogs on a lake there. So first I wanted to start with a location actually in my hometown of Nederland, and aside from that, it's actually just one street over from where I grew up and where my parents still live. Like I pointed out earlier, Nederland really is just a short drive to all these different waterways and forests and wildlife refuges, but by no means is the town where we live, the city where we live, considered rural or in the country, which is really why it was so strange and incredible to discover that there was this large flock of what we identified as black-bellied whistling ducks roosting in the neighborhood. I was visiting my parents, and they told me that they'd noticed that this flock's evening path every single night, was directly over their house. And they discovered that the ducks' final destination each evening was the roof and yard of a neighboring house just one street over. So we won't hear sound with this, but this is just a very short video clip, just so you can see these ducks sort of sitting on the house and in the yard. And then we'll hear audio. Whoops. Yeah, so just sort of like crawling all over the roof and the yard. Oddly enough, they only had interest in this one house. None of the adjacent houses or yards. So here's an audio recording of that scene. So that was really astounding when I saw and heard that, because it's just in a neighborhood that's otherwise very, very quiet, and I'd never really seen that before. That sort of sound from these whistling ducks is something that sort of got burned into my brain, and that I worked with a lot when I was working on compositional ideas, have been working on. So the next location I'd like to share with you is Smith Oaks Bird Sanctuary in High Island, Texas, which I visited on June 14th of this year. High Island is a small city in the easternmost portion of Bolivar Peninsula. And if you just drive east on I-10 to Winnie, and then you go south down Texas 124, about 20 miles, you'll reach High Island just shortly after crossing over the intercoastal waterway. Smith Oaks Bird Sanctuary is maintained by the Houston Audubon Society, and I honestly didn't have a full understanding of what I would find there. I had done a lot of reading about different locations I could possibly go to, and I knew that there would be a lot of woods that would be populated by songbirds, and that there would be several modest bodies of water where waterfowl would make their homes, but I just was in no way prepared for what I actually found. Here's a photo that I took. So I trekked through the woods after parking my car, and after about 10-15 minutes, the trees opened up onto this levee that was adjacent to a lake. The name of the lake is Clay Bottom Lake, and in the middle of the lake was this island just covered with hundreds and hundreds of white egrets and roseate spoonbills. And also, Houston Audubon has encouraged these birds to stay and mate and nest by actually putting a number of different synthetic nests all over the island. So I saw a lot of birds with hatchlings who obviously had just hatched and looked like they were going to be sticking around, even though it was kind of late in the season. Here's a wider shot that I got of the island. And then here's just a short video clip, again without sound. We'll hear the sound in a second, just so you can kind of see what the activity was like. So this is just a photo by a photographer that I found online who's done some shots out there at the Smith Oaks Sanctuary. His name is Gary Riador, and I'm very thankful that he gave me permission to use these photos. This is a white egret and her chick out at the sanctuary. And this is a roseate spoonbill. This is the bird that most of the photographers are really trying to get. This is sort of their white whale, to get a really good shot of this bird just because it's so colorful. So let's listen to an audio clip of out there. The sound world is less varied than in other locations, but it's very distinctive. And something you might notice is the short, long rhythm of the egret's calls. want to start discussing and give demonstrations of the specific recording technology involved in this project, which is Ambisonics. And I will be using additional field recordings that I've made to give demonstrations of this. So the theory and implementation of Ambisonics can really be quite complicated, and it's something that I, for one, will definitely be working to wrap my head around for years to come. And in fact, I think it's fair to say that anyone who works in the Ambisonics domain is constantly grappling with certain concepts and problems just related to the implementation of the technology. I won't go too extremely in depth here because it really is a rabbit hole, but what I will do is explain some very fundamental concepts and focus on what makes Ambisonics so special. Basically, I'm going to tell you and show you why Ambisonics is really unbelievably cool. So this photo here is a studio for ambisonic production in Oslo, Norway, at an institution called NOTAM, which is supported by the Norwegian government. It must be nice. But you can see that they have a ring of speakers at ear level and also a few rings of speakers elevated. So since I've been working on this project, I've been asked to explain the nature of Ambisonics by curious friends multiple times, and I found it difficult really to just concisely put into words every time I've tried to really explain it. And just a few weeks ago, I discovered this quote from the faculty webpage of Dave Malin, who's a researcher in multidimensional sound projection systems at the University of York in the UK. And he focuses in particular on the field of ambisonics. I really love this quote because it encapsulates the main concepts behind ambisonics in a really concise way. I'm just going to break this quote down. I think it's worth it because there's really several important takeaways. Well, first of all, the quote is, ambisonics is a method of recording information about a sound field and reproducing it over some form of loudspeaker array so as to produce the impression of hearing a true three-dimensional sound image. So the first thing is that Malin delineates that there's two stages of the process. There's a recording stage and a reproduction stage. There are other stages in the ambisonics workflow where you can do spatial transformations, but these two stages, recording and reproduction, are the important bookends of the workflow. So then Malin tells us what's being recorded. And I think it's really telling that he doesn't just say sound. I think most audio engineers, when they're asked, hey, what are you recording? They would respond by saying sound, or whatever the sound is that they're recording. But instead, Malin says information about a sound field. Okay, so what's the information? I'll come back to this momentarily, but suffice it to say, it has to do with the spatial location of the sound, and not just left and right, but also azimuth, the angle from a horizon, and elevation. Okay, so what are we reproducing to? He says some form of loudspeaker array, which sounds kind of wishy-washy, some form of loudspeaker array. Actually, this phrasing really underscores one of the most beneficial facets of ambisonics, which is that the final loudspeaker array and arrangement is really extraordinarily flexible. Within reason, you can project an ambisonic signal to any number of loudspeakers in many different arrangements. Also, the important thing is that this reproduction stage, which we refer to as decoding, is entirely independent of the recording stage. So in other words, when you're making ambisonic recordings, when you're editing them, when you're performing spatial transformations on these recordings, you can then decide after the fact what sort of loudspeaker array you're going to decode to and how many channels you're going to have. You don't have to know this from the outset. So it's very different from composing an eight-channel acousmatic work where you say, where you're using just normal amplitude panning, and you know that it's going to be 8 channels, and you're thinking from the very outset about that ring of 8, that stereo pair of 8 speakers, and how you're moving the sound around in that particular speaker array. With this, you're just thinking about moving the sound around in a full sphere, 360-degree sphere, and then the decoding stage is basically very flexible to where you can sort of figure out exactly what that's going to be afterward. So the last big point from this quote is that the goal of Ambisonics is to, quote, produce the impression of hearing a true three-dimensional sound image. And he goes on to say that he uses the term, the caveat, impression, because in actuality you would have to use many loudspeakers to come close to reproducing an actual 360-degree spherical sound field. But we can approximate very nicely and fool the ear into believing that we have something, that we are in, we're placed in that original sound field. Tonight we have a loudspeaker array that is two-dimensional because, well, we kind of had to, just because of the nature of Duncan, we had to have these speakers sort of get higher as it goes up. But if you just sort of think about them being on a flat plane, this would be a two-dimensional loudspeaker array. If we were able to do something like this, where we had loudspeakers above and below, then we would be talking about a three-dimensional loudspeaker array. And actually, there's a room at Karma at Stanford, which is their research into electroacoustic music and acoustics. And they have a room where they have a suspended floor where they have speakers beneath, so that they can have speakers hanging from above you and below you, so you get that real sense of sound coming from below. Okay, so what is it about Ambisonics that allows this kind of flexibility in which we can record this full sound field and then choose how it gets reproduced? It has everything to do with the special format that the recorded information is in, and we call this format B format. And this is really, I think, just completely genius, this conclusion, this theory that Michael Gerson, who invented Ambisonics, came up with. He pioneered Ambisonics in the 1970s, and as complicated as it can be, what he did was he made this very elegant, logical extension of the theories of another great pioneer, Alan Blumlein. And some of you might know Alan Blumlein famously invented stereophonic sound in the 1930s. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to think that stereo had to be invented, but because we've had it for so long. But it was by Blumlein. So specifically, what B format does is it extends the concept of the mid-side microphone coincident, which is pictured here, which Blumlein patented in 1933. And basically what mid-side is it's two closely placed mics. You have one mic that is a directional mic, such as like a cardioid mic, some manner of cardioid, hypercardioid. That's the mid mic. And then you have a figure of 8 mic that is the side mic. And basically, when you combine these two, you get the overall pressure gradient from the mid mic. And then what the side mic is doing is it's providing information about where the sound source is on a left to right one-dimensional plane, right? So if there's more sound arriving at the mic, the side mic over here, when it's reproduced over a loudspeaker, we're going to be fooled into thinking that the sound is on this side, and vice versa. Right? So this is what Gerson did. He took that theory and he said, okay, that's great, one-dimensional sound. Let's compound this, and then we'll be able to represent three-dimensional sound. So what he did was he took the cardioid mic from the coincident and made it an omni. So an omni microphone records sound from all directions equally. And of course it's just a mono sound source, so you don't yet have any information about where the sound's coming from. But no matter where the sound's coming from, you're recording it with this mic. It doesn't reject sound from any directions. Okay? And then what he did was he added 3 figure of 8 patterns so that we would then get not only information about left-right, but we would get information about depth in front of you and behind you, and then also height, up and down. And these 4 patterns, mic patterns, are then referred to as W, X, Y, and Z within B format. This is just a schematic for routing, routing the ambisonic signals within a digital audio workstation. So it just shows that you would have an audio track that would go to a B format encoder. So it puts all that information into what we were just looking at. And then you can perform spatial transformations at that point, which is not being shown here. And then there's the decoding stage, which is where you decide what your loudspeaker arrangement is. And so when you're doing these spatial transformations, you're thinking in a general sense about the sound field, and then it gets decoded to, here we're showing 6, out here we have 8. This is courtesy of Bruce Wiggins, another Brit at the University of Derby, who's done a lot of research in Ambisonics. Okay, so now I want to give you a demonstration using a suite of plugins that I've been using called the Ambisonic Toolkit, which was designed by a man named Trond Logis. He is a composer and researcher in Oslo. Apparently there's a lot of Norwegians into this. So what I'm going to do is I actually have a video here of a screen capture. This is the digital audio workstation Reaper, which I've been using to work in, and this is one of the plugins from the Ambisonic Toolkit. I took a recording of tree frogs that I made with the sound field microphone, and then I used this plugin called Transform Dominate. And what this particular plugin does is it focuses on different areas of the sound field, so that when you move this little ball around, as you'll see that I do in this video, what happens is the gain of certain areas of the sound field are brought up, and the gain of the other areas of the sound field are attenuated. So we're going to have to sync on this. So This is another video using a different plugin from the Ambisonics Toolkit called Focus, Press, Push, Zoom. And the recording that I have here is one that I took out at Brazos Bend State Park, and it was a chorus of bullfrogs out on the lake. I had already decoded this sound file to UHJ stereo, which is just a particular form of stereo. And now what I'm doing with this plugin is I'm using the push function, which takes the entire sound field and then just sort of compresses it, pushes it all in different directions of the loudspeaker array. So it just condenses all that information toward wherever you're pushing it. So here's that. One other very helpful plugin that I want to show you that I've been using, it's been really indispensable for me. Do that. Is called Harpex. And this plugin it does a lot of the things that other Ambisonic plugin libraries do, encoding to B format, decoding from B format to various things. You can sort of create your own virtual loudspeaker array within Harpex, and then it performs all these calculations to make sure that distribution of the audio signal is calibrated correctly. But the mode that I use most, that I couldn't find with any other plugin or Maxim SP external, is called virtual shotgun microphone mode. Basically what you can do is, this is a screen capture. On the right side here, this is showing basically the 360-degree sound field, and as portions of that little window light up, that's showing us where the spectral activity is within that sound field. And what you can do is you can place various virtual shotgun microphones, very directional microphones, within various places of this sound field. And you can point them at specific areas to isolate those sounds at the exclusion of everything else. So, as with real microphones, it's unavoidable that there's going to be some bleed through from other areas of the sound field, but it's really incredible how well you can extract individual components of a soundscape. So the next clip that I want to play from you is from, Cattail Marsh, and you're going to hear a lot of different birds, a lot of wind noise, and you're going to hear a raspy egret buried beneath it all. So this is just the full sound field without me doing any isolation using Harpex. Okay, so now what we're going to hear is the exact same clip, but now it's going to be after I've used a virtual shotgun microphone in Harpex to point it at this egret that you can hear kind of buried beneath all this stuff, and more or less isolate it as well as you possibly could. So this has been really beneficial to me, to my process, to be able to do this, because it allows for a couple things. First of all, I can, like I'm showing you, extract these individual components from a sound field, and it extracts them as mono files, and then I can take those mono files and treat them as point sources, re-encoding them to B format, and then I can spatialize that throughout the sound field. What it also allows me to do, quite simply, is just hear individual utterances, wildlife utterances, much more clearly, which has been vital to compositional processes as I'm transcribing a lot of these sounds. This is actually a transcription that I made up in an artist residency that I was doing. I had just like many sheets that just looked like a crazy person scribbling, of me just transcribing these sounds, these utterances of various wildlife. I called the audio clip that I transcribed this one from Egret Jam, and it amuses me every time I hear it. Maybe you'll see why when it's played, but there's this very odd, like, metric lattice that becomes apparent with these birds that are tweeting in the background, and then the egret sort of soloing with what sounds like accompaniment. So I think this is a good way to segue into talking about compositional ideas that I'm working on based on all this. I've been working on a piece for double bass and electronics. And so now, Max, I'm going to invite you to come up. What we'll do tonight is, especially since Max just took this on Monday, we're going to be giving you peeks at different portions of the piece, and I'm going to be relating these to recordings that I've made and sort of how I'm deriving materials from the recordings. So this is a photo of a red-winged blackbird, which is a type of bird that's really just ubiquitous in the marshes along the Gulf Coast. And the music that I've been working on has really sort of poured forth from the sound of the call of this bird, in sort of a bit of an abstract sort of way. So Chapman, can you play that next recording? It's a very short but very harmonious call, and I listened to it many times. It appeared on very many different recordings that I had, and after listening to it multiple times, I realized that the reason I was so attracted to it, why I've always been attracted to it since I was a kid, and thought it was so beautiful, is that there's so many things that are musical about the call. I did a little bit of spectral analysis, and I used my ears mostly, and I came up with this transcription. Chapman, could you just go back to that and just play it one more time so we can hear it? So that's the transcription that I arrived at. And the really interesting thing about this for me is that there's a built-in dominant to tonic relationship in this call. The first 3 notes of the melody, which are harmonized there, represented by the first measure, give us this dominant tension, and then the downbeat of the next measure that I transcribed is the resolution. And so I actually zeroed in on the melody that's projected by this call. I'm doing things also with the harmony, but I noticed that the melody itself was also very interesting. And what I started doing was deriving musical motives from this call, that just G, D flat, A flat, mostly the first 3 notes that represent this tension. And then to the right, I'm just showing in set theory that the prime form of this would be what we would call, music theory nerds would call 016. And so from that, you can derive other sets that are members of 016 that are related by inversion and different transformations. And so in this, some of the music that I've written, I have motives that are projections of 016 all over the place. And these are just a few score examples that we're going to play for you. And as you can see, I'm actually not just using 016, but I've sort of like nested these instances of 016, sort of stringing them, linking them together to create longer gestures and longer articulations of this pitch set. So first, Max is going to play a passage that, or a couple measures from the screenshot on the upper left here. That's measure 10. Okay. And now he's going to play the screenshot at the bottom of the page, measure 26 here. And then the last one at the top right. So besides creating a lot of different melodic gestures using this projection of this pitch set, I'm also doing imitation of various wildlife utterances. They're not always exact one-to-one representations, but I'm sort of abstracting from the pitch and the contour and the timbre to come up with sort of extrapolations of those utterances. And so before we go through a couple of these, before each one of them, we'll hear a recording of what it is that's being imitated. So the first one is just grunts from an alligator that I recorded and actually isolated using the Harpex plugin. Yeah, so that's just a bunch of grunts from an alligator that actually happened over probably about 45 minutes, and I just sort of condensed it down so that we could hear a string of them. It's probably not a very big alligator because usually the grunts are a little bit deeper than that. So I was thinking about a much larger alligator when I was doing this. So Max, if you'll play the excerpt 4, this is at the top. Yes. So just sort of sliding all around this this pitch D, which is what the alligator grunt was at, and just sort of deriving something very aggressive from that. The next recording is back to that bird outside my apartment. Just hear that. This is just one call from that bird. So the thing that really I was drawn to about this, and also other calls from waterfowl, is this sort of this downward gesture, this sort of break in the passaggio, if you will, of a bird. My wife's an opera singer; she's going to laugh at me for saying that now. And also this sort of spectral envelope that happens, where you have sort of a very rich spectrum that's open and then sort of closes up. And so I imitate that some with harmonics that are being sort of bent and slide down and then sort of landing on a lower arrival note. So now Max will play, this is starting at measure 35. Okay. And then the last animal imitation that we'll talk about here is of the whistling ducks. And so just have a recording here from Brazos Bend where you'll hear them very sort of faintly, just a few of them flying over. And then the screenshot here at the bottom is how I've attempted to handle that, basically touch forth artificial harmonics that are sort of sliding, zigzagging up and down microtonally. Okay, so that's just little small chunks. So now Max is just going to play an excerpt of the piece, and you'll hear some of this material sort of strung together in longer chunks. just want to talk a little bit about what I'm doing with the recordings themselves, how I'm dealing with them in electronics of the piece that I'm working on. And this photo is of a bird called a black-necked stilt, also from the same photographer who shot the photos out at Smith Oaks. And I got some really great recordings of these out at Cattail Marsh. My dad and I were walking a levee through the marsh, and they were just sort of circling our heads, flying all around, and I just kept the mic in one position so that I would get this sort of sense that the birds were flying around me. And so what I've done is I've taken a recording of these birds, and I did a really intensive pitch tracking from start to finish of this recording to just see sort of where it was going. And the stilts were sort of centered around D, but sort of oscillating up to E flat and down to C sharp. And then there's this really intense moment you can see around 40 where there's this one bird who is really close that's up around E flat, and then he finally breaks into E natural, which we haven't had yet. And then there's sort of a denouement from there. And so I thought that it would be really great to actually take this recording as is and structure electronics around it, which is an idea that I've gotten from other mentors, just taking a recording as is and working with it as it is. So let's just hear just this recording, this raw recording first. Hopefully you were able to get a sense of the birds circling around you at a certain point. So now, lastly, what we're going to hear is an excerpt of the fixed media component of the piece that I'm working on. It's pretty thick, there's a lot of layers. What you're going to hear is tree frogs that are pulsing, which I isolated using the Harpex plugin, and then actually took and sort of structured in a very regular pulse, because they do reach a very regular pulse at a certain point, and then I just extended that outward. You're also going to hear synthesized tree frogs. I wrote a Maximus P patch in which I basically had analyzed the spectrum of tree frogs, and then I used bandpass pink noise to reproduce the spectrum of tree frogs, but I'm filtering it in different sorts of ways so that it never quite sounds the same. It evolves, but it's pulsing. Then you're also going to hear, of course, those stilts. You'll hear bullfrogs, and you'll also hear whistling ducks, and a synthesizer that's playing harmonies that I made using a recording of cicadas. I actually took this recording of cicadas and then just very severely bandpass filtered the recording until I got these really complex sorts of spectra, and then I assigned it to a software sampler so that I could play harmonies like that. And then you'll also hear samples of double bass that I've recorded in the past, mostly multiphonics that have been granulated and sort of spatialized. So here's a short 2-minute excerpt of the electronics. So with that, I'm going to end this evening's presentation, and again, I would like to thank RIM Labs, Dr. Stallman, Dr. Welch, for all their help with this. It's no small feat to put together an event like this with all these speakers. So thank you guys for everything. And I want to thank those of you who were here helping set this up earlier. And I want to go ahead and pre-thank everyone who will help with the teardown. And, you know, I will buy you beer or whatever you like, bribe you with beer. So thank you very much.